Vous voulez voyager? Achetez vos billets d'avion à l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel. Avec l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, pas de problème de connexion, pas de problème de transfert de vol. Avec l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, c'est le voyage en toute tranquillité, en toute beauté, de votre maison jusqu'à votre destination. Votre satisfaction est notre plaisir.
Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for tuning in. Today, I'm going to be talking about asylum and just the basics of asylum. So I'm going to start with the legal definition of asylum, and I'm going to read this. So who exactly is an asylee? An asylee is an alien in the United States or at the port of entry who is found to be unable or unwilling to return to his or her country of nationality or to seek the protection of that country because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution. So I'm going to highlight some keywords there. I'm going to talk about some keywords in that definition, and that's really what asylum is. So we talked about alien, and of course, the new Biden administration will be changing that word from alien to non-citizens. I'm looking forward to that. So you have to be in the United States. You have to be physically in the United States in order to apply for asylum. Or you could apply for asylum at the port of entry. Okay, now the key word there again is persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution. So what exactly does this mean? It means that you must be in fear of harm or danger from your home country. And that's why you're fleeing. You're fleeing to the United States. So in fleeing, you can either flee and report at the port of entry at the border. When you are at the border, you meet a border control officer and you tell the officer, I am applying for asylum. And the officer will do a screening and ask you, why are you fleeing from your country or why are you applying for asylum? And that's when you can tell the asylum officer or the border control officer, your story. Telling the border patrol officer, be mindful about why you are fleeing your country. You're not telling the border patrol officer that you're fleeing because you're coming here for greener pastures. No, you have to tell them what you're suffering from your country and what you're afraid of and why you can't return to your country. So after screening and listening to your story, if he believes you, he will now grant you a credible fear hearing, or either conclude that your story is credible and then refer you to the immigration court. So also, when you are in the United States, you may have come in with a visa and you now realize that you can't return to your country because you fear danger or you fear harm may be caused to you, and circumstances may change. So you may be able to apply for asylum even though you came in with a visa. So it really all depends. So now I'm going to go into persecution and well-founded fear of persecution. When we talk about persecution, we're actually referring to past persecution. You can apply for asylum if it was a past persecution that you suffered, or a well-founded, that means future persecution. So you may either have suffered past persecution and you're still afraid to return. That's future persecution. Or you may not even have suffered any past persecution, but you're just afraid to return to your country because you believe that harm will be caused you. So now we are talking about harm. It is important to ask, who will be causing you this harm? Is it just people from your family or members of an organization or anybody? In order to qualify for asylum, it has to be a government actor. And this really means that it may have been the government who's persecuting you or wanting to cause harm to you, or an agent of the government. If it's not the agent of the government, it may be a group or an association or group of people that the government cannot control. And this could be gangs, it could be the militia, it could be guerrilla, well, just a group that the government cannot control. It could also be a group that the government has refused to do anything about. Maybe people who have been fleeing, or if people have become victims of female genital mutilation, FGM, or people who have been abused, and the government is really not ready or has refused to do anything about that. So you don't feel protected. These are people who may be eligible for asylum. However, in order to qualify for asylum, you don't just apply for asylum because you belong or you've experienced or suffered harm in any way or form. You have to tie those experiences to the 5 protective grounds. And the 5 protective grounds are: 1, race. You can apply for asylum, or you may be eligible to apply for asylum if you say, oh, that the government or an agent of the government has caused you harm or may cause you harm if you return because of your race, because of your ethnicity. Maybe your ethnicity, you are in the minority, or something about your ethnicity, and you feel that you're going to your situation because of the race you belong to, you'll be put in harm. So that can qualify you for asylum. The other ground will be in terms of religion. And I'll give you an instance. If you're maybe a Christian or a Muslim, and maybe you come from a predominantly Muslim country and you're a Christian there, if you're not allowed to worship and all that, that could be a form of persecution. So that's a second protective ground. The third ground could be nationality, and that is somewhat similar to race. So with that, if you belong to that nationality and you feel that, oh, you'll be placed in harm or you'll be persecuted because of your nationality, yes, you may be eligible for asylum. The fourth is social group. You have to if you're a member of a social group. And what exactly is this social group? Where maybe people of the same age, the same class, you guys share the same characteristics, and maybe you have immutable characteristics. That is, this group, these are groups of people. Before, it could be people who are abused, maybe abused women, or it could be, let me say, gangs. But the criteria have all changed. But you really have to become a member of a particular group. And then you feel that, yes, because you're a member of this particular group, you will suffer persecution. So with that, yes, you can qualify for asylum, or you're eligible to apply for asylum. And then the fifth group is because of political opinion. So if you are doing anything politically, if you're associated politically in your country, and you feel that, yes, either rebels or opposing groups may persecute you because of your position, yes, you may be eligible for asylum. So whatever harm, whatever persecution, whatever danger you're fleeing from has to be tied to one or more of these grounds. If it is not tied to any of these grounds, then you may not be eligible for asylum. So now, having talked to you about the government, we're now talking about what exactly is this persecution? How do you describe this persecution? So persecution could be physical persecution. It could be a significant physical. That means somebody using force against you, harming you, harassing you, torturing you. This is physical. These are things you could see. If you're able to take pictures, that's fine. Any evidence that will help your case will be very helpful. If you're not able to, and another form of persecution is also emotional or psychological persecution. And with this is, maybe you may not have suffered any physical harm. You may have been locked in the jail for so long a time. I mean, nobody hurt you there, but the fact that your freedom was restricted, you were restrained, and you suffered harm based on that, yes, that could be a basis for asylum. You could also, because of your religion, you were prevented from practicing or preaching or practicing your religion in some regions, and you fear for your life, or you were threatened that if you preach or if you do anything about your religion, you may be killed, and you've received those threats. And whatever you have done to prevent yourself from being subjected to these threats, they keep harassing you. Yes, you may be subjected to asylum, you may be subjected to persecution and be eligible to apply for asylum. So asylum really is, you will be the person to be able to tell all the stories. You're able to know that what has happened to you and be able to narrate all the stories to the immigration officer, to the asylum officer. So now, in narrating the stories, you have to be mindful about who. You don't come out to tell the asylum officer when he asks, who did this to you? And you say, oh, I don't know, it's some unknown person. That way, you're already defeating yourself, because for asylum, in order to be successful with asylum, it has to be tied to the government or any agent of the government. So now, in addition to having satisfied those grounds, you would want to know, how do you apply for asylum? There are two ways to apply for asylum, and that's affirmative asylum or defensive asylum. Affirmative means you are applying on your own, and is usually done before an asylum officer, and you apply to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. Now, the other type is defensive asylum. And with defensive asylum, this is when you have applied and maybe gone before at the port of entry, at the border, and the asylum officer, the border patrol officer, has screened you and believe that you're credible, or your story is credible. He now refers you to the immigration judge. Or for some reason, you have been in the country and the situation in your country has changed, or circumstances have changed, and maybe you have overstayed your visit, and now you have been subjected or taken to the immigration before the immigration court. That may be one of the reliefs you can apply for. So before the immigration judge, that is called the defensive asylum. And before the asylum officer, that is affirmative asylum. And then sometimes the affirmative asylum could also end up in court. I mean, if you're denied by the asylum officer, he now refers you to court. So now, in talking about asylum, with all these, with having gone before the immigration officer or asylum officer, you'd have to prepare your case very well. You have to be persuasive. You have to have country conditions, supporting evidence. If there's anybody who knows information about what has happened to you, get affidavits from them, and help them. That could help your story. Now, in putting your evidence together, you need to be believable. You need to be credible, because you're going to testify, especially if you're in court. You're going to testify in court about everything you have said, and you can't lie on your application. You don't want to do that, because you're going to be subjected to an examination in chief by your attorney, and also cross-examination, and the judge is going to ask you questions. So you'd want to be careful and make sure that your story is consistent. In writing your story, you want to be as detailed as possible. You have to have dates. You have to have where the harassment, where the harm, where the threats, all those things happen to you. Whether it happened in the morning, whether it happened in the afternoon, on what day it was, who was there with you, and what did you do? So when you were subjected to these threats, okay, and of course it has to be tied to one of those 5 grounds. What did you do? Did you report to the police? If you reported to the police, what did the police do? Did they write a report? If they did, try and get that report and add to your story. If you did not report to the police, why didn't you report to the police? You need to state that in your story. Also, if you were injured or if you were harmed in some way, did you go to the hospital? If you have hospital records, you can use that to support your story. So you tell them, why did you not go to the hospital? Or if you went to the hospital, are you able to get those reports? So this is all, you need to have all that supporting evidence, because you were the one who experienced this. So you really want to satisfy either the immigration officer or asylum officer or the judge that all these things really happened to you. So now, I've said it before, if you have people, witnesses, or people who are aware of what you suffered, yes, help them, let them add to your story to corroborate what you have said. All those will be helpful. So having said that, you want to make sure that everything that you're putting down is quite detailed. And then for all these things that have happened to you, if you're talking about it happening in a particular locality, geographical location, what efforts did you make in relocating to another location? And then in relocating to that location, did that persecution persist? Did they continue with that harassment? If they did, then what happened? Was it a single incident that happened and then you decided to flee to the United States? Or were there multiple incidents? All this will be looked at in totality by either the asylum officer or the immigration judge. So you want to be as detailed as possible. If there were 5 incidents, narrate all those 5 incidents. If there's only one incident and that one you feared this country, you're going to be dead. Yes, it could be out of one single incident, but you have to be persuasive and you have to show proof as to why you had to flee based on that one incident. Now, in order to apply for asylum, when do you apply for asylum? You're supposed to apply for asylum within 1 year of your entry into the United States. So the question is, what happens if after 1 year, if I apply after 1 year? Yes, sometimes that can be waived. The 1 year requirement can be waived. And it can be waived because there are changed country situations, conditions. There might be, your circumstances may change, or even if it doesn't change, there are some extraordinary circumstances. Maybe when you wanted to apply, you became very ill, or something may have happened or intervened as to why you did not apply within the 1 year. So if those questions, if you answer those questions truthfully or describe the situations or circumstances that made you not apply truthfully, and if it's persuasive, the 1 year may be waived for you. So having said that, now we're now going to talk about what the benefits are for asylum. So with asylum, the good part of asylum is if you're granted asylum, and especially if you have a family, you all will be allowed to stay in the United States. So with asylum, after your asylum has been granted, 1 year after your asylum has been granted and you become an asylee, you can now apply to adjust your status to a lawful permanent resident. So you're able to get your green card. And once you become an asylee, you can use that to work. You can use that document to work. You don't need to to apply for a work authorization again. So now I'm talking about your family. Yes, your family can apply with you, along with you. And that does not mean submitting a separate application. They can become derivative applicants or asylee applicants because of you, and they would derive their status from you. So that if you are granted if you are granted asylum, they will derive from your status. So they don't need to apply, they don't need to submit a separate application, but their names will be part of your application. If you're married at the time, yes, your wife will benefit from that. And if your wife is here in the United States with you, yes, your wife can also get the work authorization, as well as your children. But those children have to be under 21 years and they have to be unmarried in order to benefit as a derivative asylee. So those ones, they will be part of your application, and you only need one application and submit all of that. Okay? So no, I will take that back. You have to apply for them, but then it's still going to be your story. But it's still going to be based on your story. They don't have to suffer harm themselves. So after submitting your application, and if you've been granted asylum and you apply after 1 year for the green card, you will also be entitled to an unrestricted Social Security card. And with that, it's unrestricted. You're able to work, you're able to apply for your driver's license and all of that. It means you can live permanently in the United States. So that brings me to my next question. So having all these things happen to you. You've now gotten your green card in the United States. The next question will be, if I have cost to travel to my country, should I travel? Will I be able to travel? And how does that affect my asylee status? Okay, I'm going to give you three different scenarios when it comes to travel. The first is if you are an asylum applicant. So you're still applying for asylum. Your asylum has not yet been heard. It has not been determined. And then there's an urgent need to travel. And you want to travel back to your country. Now, remember, you are fleeing from persecution. And you're asking either the judge or the immigration officer that you can't return to your country because there is a well-founded fear of persecution. So this will be contrary to what you have said or what you have alleged, saying that your country, you fear to return to your country, and all of a sudden you want to return to your country. So if you must travel, you should not travel to the country of your nationality or the country you're claiming asylum from or you're being persecuted from. So that country, if you have to travel, in order to travel, if you must travel, you should get an advance parole. You have to apply for it and you have to have it approved before you travel. However, before you travel, I'll ask you, please seek the advice of an attorney before doing so. Because even if you get that, if you're approved for the advance parole and you return to the country of persecution, upon your return, you're going to be subjected to an inspection at the port of entry, maybe at the airport. And at the airport, they're going to screen you again. And they may deem that your application, they may reach the determination that your asylum application is abandoned because you returned to the country you are alleging persecution from. So you'd want to seek counsel before you travel. The next scenario will be if you have been granted the asylee status and then you have need to travel and you want to travel to that country, to your home country where you're claiming persecution, that you'll be persecuted if you return. So again, yes, if you must travel, seek the counsel of the advice or counsel of an attorney. But if you have to travel, you have to apply for a refugee travel document, not an advance parole, a refugee travel document. And again, you're going to be subjected to inspection at the port of entry by the Customs and Border Patrol officer. So they may or may not grant you entry into the United States because they will deem, oh, if you're able to travel to your country, maybe the persecution no longer exists and you're able to go back to your country. So you want to seek counsel before doing that. As well, the third scenario will be if you are a lawful permanent resident based on asylum and you want to return to your country. Yes, you can travel, but again, you're going to be subjected to that inspection and you may or may not be allowed to enter, or your asylum status may be terminated because they would say, oh, the persecution no longer exists. So as always, anytime you plan to travel, especially with an asylee status, please seek the counsel of an attorney on whether you should travel or not. At best, it's best to travel when you're a citizen to your home country if you need to travel. So having said that, let me see if I've missed any other points. Okay, now, yes, a lot of you would want to know what is the success rate of with asylum. And I would say it's because it's a humanitarian relief, it's also a discretionary relief. Yes, most times you have to persuade. If your story is not persuasive enough, it's really subjective and it all depends on the asylum officer or the immigration judge. So whatever decision they come up with, it's all based on the story and how you have articulated your story. If you're not believable, then they may or may not grant you asylum. But I would tell you that for the past 4 years with the previous administration, it hasn't been too favorable. I mean, the statistics hasn't been too favorable we've had only about 30% approval rating when it comes to asylum cases. So with that, that will give you an idea of that most asylum applications have been denied. So it all depends. It doesn't mean that you don't have a credible story, but it's just that the administration were really adverse to asylum, and a lot of judges, mostly appointed by the Trump administration, would not grant asylum. So unfortunately, that was the case. But this time, we're hopeful, and you don't need to lose hope. Or if you feel that, yes, you're really in fear of harm, it's still apply, because we're now in a new administration and maybe the treatment will be different. So that's it for asylum. And before I close, I would want to also clarify two similar terminologies or classes that people confuse sometimes. I'm going to tell you the difference between an asylee and a refugee. So an asylee, it's just basically the same thing. They're both fleeing from persecution, and it has to be based on those 5 grounds: on race, religion, nationality, social group, and political opinion. They're all the same thing. You must be fleeing from persecution and well-founded fear of persecution. So past persecution or future persecution, they both apply. But in this instance, the only difference is that in asylum, you're applying in the United States. You must be physically present in the United States. And whereas for refugee, being a refugee, you have to be applying from outside the United States. So that's the subtle difference between the two. Otherwise, both of them are humanitarian reliefs. And then when it comes to the refugees applications, those have a cap. During the Trump administration, the cap was 15,000. But with asylum, there really isn't a cap. And with the Biden administration, they have pledged to increase that number for refugees. I've had numbers floating around, maybe 125,000. So it really depends. So they are very similar, but it just depends on where you are, where you'll be applying from. So that brings me to the end of my presentation about asylum. Last week, I told you about the Biden updates, the Biden administration updates. And I was hoping to give you more updates today about what the Biden administration plans to do about the immigration reforms. Unfortunately, the executive action that was supposed to he was supposed to sign yesterday for immigration, he has deferred that. Maybe it will be coming up in the later week or later weeks, but it wasn't done yesterday. So I really don't have much update for you regarding that. The only update I will reiterate will be what I told you last week about not taking any action. If you're applying for a benefit, continue applying for that benefit. There are reforms, there are proposals. He has big plans. There are things that might change, but there is nothing going on now. So don't stop anything you're doing. If you're in an application process, don't withdraw your application. If you're planning to apply, don't hold off applying. Still apply, because no action needs to be taken now. Nothing has been taken now. Nothing has been presented to the Congress, and no decision has been made. No policies have been made. No new regulations. But these are plans for the Biden administration. So we are still hopeful that something will happen. And I'm just here telling you that you should not take any action and to stop whatever you're doing. So that brings me to the end of today's presentation. I received some comments from some of you about having the presentation translated to French, I believe. Yes, to French language. And yes, I've heard you, and I would like you all to be a part of this. So I'm working on that, and hopefully maybe in the coming weeks, I'll be able to get someone who can translate in French so that you all can benefit from these presentations. Again, I would always want to thank you for tuning in, and please share your comments. Let me know if you have any concerns, and if there's a particular topic you'd want me to talk about, feel free and let me know, okay? Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a good rest of your weekend. Bye.
Du nouveau à Minneapolis, Tempo Afrique Travel. Vous voulez voyager? Achetez vos billets d'avion à l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel. Avec l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, pas de problème de connexion, pas de problème de transfert de vol. Avec l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, c'est le voyage en toute tranquillité, en toute beauté, de votre maison jusqu'à votre destination. Votre satisfaction est notre plaisir.